Good morning, everyone. Good morning. It is, sorry, let me clear my throat. It is great to be here with you all. They gave me a mic, yeah. And this is our 11th gathering of the World Open Innovation Conference. As I scan our audience, I see Chris Tucci, who was one of the organizers of the very first conference. Chris. Am I seeing Joel West? Because he was with us yesterday, but I don't think I see him yet. He was also here, along with Frank Pillar. I'll say a little bit more about that in just a moment, but it's great to be here finally in Berkeley itself for our conference. I thought, though, I would begin with just thinking about the wider world. You may have noticed we had an election yesterday here in the United States. And the really, really good news is it's over. Our elections go on forever. It is so nice to have it finally done. And I would also say we have a clear result. So I don't think we're going to see a lot of bickering and fighting. I don't think there will be any violent protests at the Capitol and things like this. I think we will get back to a peaceful transfer of power. And so that's going to let us, move forward in a more positive direction. As I was thinking about us, though, if you look not just in the results in the U.S. yesterday, but in most of the major European countries, you see that populism, conservatism is really on the move. They really have the momentum, whether it's in France or whether Germany, the Netherlands. The UK would be an exception to this, but with that accepted, Italy. The forces of populism are really on the rise. And I think for those of us who are studying openness, open society, open science, open innovation, we have some work to do, I think. We have to show that openness actually leads to stronger, better, more prosperous societies. Even for our conference here, we had several of our colleagues who could not get visas to come to our conference. They had papers here, they were accepted, but they could not get the visa. So it's important that we keep societies open. If we're about to impose tariff barriers across lots of industries, that's probably going to close things down a little bit. So we have to be mindful that we have to show, and it isn't enough to show that we get a positive T statistic in our data, but that we really can follow things through to an actual tangible result. So for those of us from companies, it's not enough to do innovation theater. We've got to actually deliver something tangible and meaningful to that. For those of us in academia, it's not enough to do virtue signaling about how nice this would be for the world. We've actually got to show that this matters. This generates positive, real outcomes. So I think that's some work we have to do as I was reflecting on the election to be with you this morning. So I'll let that sink in for a second and then get into our conference. Just briefly, our very first one was up in Silverado, California, in Napa Valley. Nice work if you can find it. And then we had several locations since then, including Santa Clara near Intel's headquarters, Asade in Barcelona, and I would say San Francisco in quotation marks, because we were really at a Marriott near the airport. We were nowhere near the downtown. Then we had a great event in Asade, in Barcelona in 2016, in Rome in 2019. We did get knocked online for 2 years because of the pandemic. Marcel and the TU Eindhoven team took things over on the second of those, and we had our next meeting in Eindhoven, and then last year in Bilbao. We're here this year. So it really has become a world open innovation conference. So why did we do this? There are already lots of conferences, including conferences on innovation. Why did the world need another innovation conference at the end of the calendar year, no less? And the idea was we needed, in studying innovation, to make stronger connections between theory and practice. And I had the sense that many of my very, very smart academic colleagues weren't always aware of some of the things going on in industry. And for us in innovation studies, industry is the laboratory. This is where the experiments are actually being done. It's not like the chemistry department over here where you can set up a result in the lab and run it and study it, and somebody else can set it up and repeat and validate the experiment. We humans are social creatures. We don't necessarily get to rerun these experiments in the social sciences. So we need to stay connected to the lab, to the industry. And that was our motivation for the conference. And so thanks to the hard work of the teams here, we are trying to find ways to connect between theory and practice. How many people here have reviewed a paper, at least one paper for the Open Innovation Conference? Put those hands up high and proud, because this is our invisible college. These are the people who do the hard work to vet, curate, comment, give feedback on the academic papers. And then we've already thanked our academic and industry teams. It really is important, the work that you're doing. And of course, my Berkeley colleagues that are trying to make this all function smoothly. I also wanted to say, if you think about theory and practice, individuals have an important role here. And I think of them, in our literature thinks of them as boundary spanners. People who have a foot in both worlds, people who can function well in both worlds and move back and forth. And so I saw Owana here earlier today. You're one of them. You are absolutely one of them. My colleague who's not here with us today, Naveen Kunda, 11 years at Clorox running their open innovation activities in the consumer packaged goods area, but he too has worked with the American Institute of Chemical Engineering, teaching courses, leading seminars, helping to get people in industry to think about and understand these things. And so the people who have a foot in both worlds, I think, play a really interesting role in our group. And so I wanted just to take a moment to celebrate them. I think we all probably can recite this, so I won't read it to you now, but the idea is that we have a particular definition of open innovation, and this informs both the theory and the practice of what we are doing. And notice that there's an important link to the underlying business model of the organization. So yes, it's about new ideas and new technologies, but it also continues and grabs our attention for the commercialization phase of things. So value creation and value capture in what we do. Now, this did not descend out of the sky one day. This actually rests on a long literature of prior work, and I don't have time in a short keynote to tell you all about it. My poor PhD students yesterday got a strong dose of this, so they can help fill in some things. But economists for a long time have thought about research and development, where when you start the project, you don't know in advance exactly what's going to happen at the end. You're trying for particular results, but it is research. You don't know what the result's going to be in advance. And that means sometimes you learn things you didn't expect. And what do you do with these surprising outcomes? Well, in the economics literature, this was noted, and they were termed spillovers. Meaning these are pieces of knowledge that were generated through the R&D process, and the results of that spill over outside the organization that paid for the work to the larger society. And in the economics literature, these spillovers were noted. People like Ken Arrow even argued because you get more social benefit than you do private benefit, that is a motivation to subsidize research and development in society, because then the company will produce more R&D than it would privately, because some of the benefit spills over to others. So we don't get enough R&D if we don't provide some support. So this idea of spillovers is very important. However, it was open innovation that said we can take spillovers and channel them and guide and direct and manage and use spillovers in the innovation process. That's something that open innovation contributed that wasn't there before. And of course, our colleagues for the academic side from Cohen and Leventhal or Nathan Rosenberg were talking about the value of doing this research, of course, to try to get some knowledge that you can use, but it also makes the organization better able to absorb and incorporate the learnings from outside as well. So you get kind of a second benefit from R&D. Yes, you get the learning from your project, but you also are more deeply connected to the surrounding knowledge going on as well, and that enables you to make better use of the knowledge yourself. And at the time that the book came out in 2003, it was fair to say that a lot of our thinking about innovation was heavily colored by two Harvard faculty members, Alfred Chandler and Michael Porter. Chandler had done a wonderful job documenting the role of scale and scope inside large organizations in the US in the 20th century. He had many accounts, but the one that I'm really struck by was his analysis of General Motors, who at the time competing with Ford Motor Company in the early 20th century. Ford had mass production, they had the Model T, they had the cost advantage, but every car was black. And it had the whole entire organization was focused in a very functional way on delivering high volumes of very low cost Model Ts. Alfred Sloan comes along at GM and creates a different organizational structure, a multi-divisional structure, what Chandler called the M form. And through that, they were able to outflank Ford Motor Company in products because each of those divisions produced different vehicles. So there was a car for every purse and every purpose. And this proved to be a superior organizational structure to compete with Ford. So in the accounts of Chandler, the real action is inside the organization, and how you organize matters. And if you organize well and better, and if you can mobilize your organization more effectively, you can win. Michael Porter comes along and notices that, using industrial organization economics, we can look at, who benefits in society from innovation, and there's consumer surplus and there's producer surplus. And in his approach to competitive strategy, he said, okay, well, for the purposes of strategy, these are companies. Let's forget about consumer surplus. Let's focus on producer surplus. How do we maximize producer surplus? And it turns out he had some wonderful ideas that have really endured to raise barriers to outsiders trying to enter your industry, lock in customers and increase their switching costs to move other places. All of these techniques were designed to increase producer surplus in Michael Porter. And like Chandler, the action is all inside the firm. So when we think about startups or universities, these are minor players in Chandler and Porter. They don't really have a lot to offer in understanding the role of innovation. So this suggests to me, when I was starting to do my work, I started looking at some of the data from the National Science Foundation, and I found something that I think Chandler and Porter would have a hard time explaining. For those of you who are fans of Thomas Kuhn and the structure of scientific revolutions, I think of these as anomalies, where the theory, according to Chandler and Porter, would predict this, but instead we see that. And what we see in particular, because there's a lot of numbers on this chart, I'm not going to point to all of them, don't worry, but I do want to point to 4 of them. In 1981, all of the R&D spending done in the United States, more than 70% of it was done by very large companies. And indeed, this is kind of the world of Chandler and Porter. So that would be consistent. In that same year, the small companies of less than 1,000 employees, added all together, were less than 5% of all the R&D activity. So if you're looking for the cutting edge, the latest stuff, where can we get the knowledge we need to innovate, grow, and win, most of that work was being done here. And that would have been quite familiar to a Chandler and a Porter. But looking 40 years on, here's where the anomalies crop up. Somehow, large companies are now almost half of their relative share of R&D in the economy. And those little small companies that were not rounding error, but close, they've grown to a much more substantial part of the R&D activity going on in the country. And I think our Chandler and Porter would have a hard time explaining that result. And I guess two parts. How do you explain the decline in the large companies? How do you explain the rapid expansion in the small companies? So this is not a causal proof, but one can claim that open innovation is a plausible account that could explain these data. Because in the time from 1981 to 2001, a lot of things have changed institutionally that have eroded the knowledge accumulation in the large companies and spread that knowledge to many, many more parts of the society, including universities and startups. So I list a few of them here. And one of the interesting things about this is if you've got technology that you've created in your internal organization, before, there wasn't really much you could do with it. If your own businesses weren't going to use it, it was sort of just stuck on the shelf. 5 minutes? Thank you, Marisol. But if you, in the world of open innovation, the whole inside-out part of open innovation is about different ways you can organize, structure, and manage external possibilities for the technologies inside that you're not using. So the idea is here, hey, these spillovers we talk about, we can manage those, whether that's from the outside coming into our organization or from the inside going out. There's a lot of evidence that I won't, in the interest of time, go over very much, that there is reason to be hopeful that open innovation can deliver improved organizational performance, both qualitative and quantitative. More recently, Marcel and his colleagues and myself with a woman named Chin-Lee Liu have used topic modeling techniques to also, among other things, get larger samples. And even with these new methods, we again find support for the positive outcomes from open innovation. This I don't want to skip over because open innovation doesn't always work, but anybody reading our literature would never know about it. We do a great job of documenting successes. We don't do nearly as good a job of capturing and understanding the failures that arise from open innovation. So I do want to point a couple of them out to you now and encourage you to look for more. I promise you they're out there, but we've got to look for them to get them. Quirky, startup company, I think founded in 2009, raised $170 million. That's a well-funded startup company. With CEO Ben Kaufman. The idea was crowdsourcing for consumer products. And through the crowd, we were going to get ideas for new products, and we were going to look at them, select the best ones, and then manufacture them, sell them under the Quirky name, and give a royalty back to the person who proposed the idea. So it was a really strong implementation of crowdsourcing, yet it went bankrupt. So what does that say about the limits of crowdsourcing? That's why we need to study these things. There's a lot of stuff we've written about crowdsourcing. My colleague Chris Tucci has written some really good work in crowdsourcing. We need to look at the failures as well as the successes. And then a second one that will be familiar to some of the older scholars in the room, and maybe some of you from industry. In the 2000s, we celebrated Procter & Gamble and their Connect and Develop model as a wonderful implementation of open innovation. And they really could point to tangible revenue increases from using this new approach. In the 2010 to 2020 period, however, the magic seemed to stop. They even brought back the CEO who left in 2008 in 2014 to try to restore the magic again, and it didn't ignite new growth. So the same company, even the same leader that had such success in the 2000s, really struggles in the following decade. So I hope that gets you curious and interested. And the point is not only to look at these, the point is to go look for more. I don't have time for this, so I'll skip it. In the handbook that we've produced recently, and thank you Agnieszka Rajovan, who was my co-author on that, along with Wim van Haverbeke and Joel West, there's a whole set of new theories where people are looking at open innovation seriously, but saying we need stronger conceptual formulations of what this is really about. And the fact that people are willing to look at these and work on them suggests that we're going to get some rich insights theoretically going forward. And also in the handbook, we document some new practices in open innovation. And for those of you doing practice sessions today, you are a part of this. You are also in the lab doing new experiments. And so I really encourage all of us to go to at least one practice session and see what's going on in the laboratory. I think we do have some challenges, apart from showing the value of openness to our colleagues and in our society. A lot of work on AI is looking at just the algorithm, the bigger and bigger and bigger models, and maybe a little bit about the compute. But there's a whole lot of other complementary pieces that have to be analyzed as part of this, like the training data. And now we're seeing a lot of open source models as well coming in that are going to be competing with the proprietary models. And then all the grand challenges and how we address those. And there's, I think, a real opportunity for open innovation to be part of that. All right, Marisol, conclusion. A lot's happened in 20 years. I think it's actually stronger today than it's ever been because we have stronger research from our colleagues. We've got more empirical evidence from people in industry. We've got some boundary spanners moving back and forth across them. We've done a lot to build events and activities to connect and disseminate all of this work. And many of you are involved in one or more of those. So thank you so much for that. And I think if we can keep the connection of theory and practice in open innovation, that our future for the next 20 years will be every bit as bright. So with that, I will say thank you.